Hello friends, my name is Christopher. This is part one of a 9-part series for shed building, and today I'm talking about site preparation and getting your foundation taken care of. Oh, that's a good looking thumbnail right there. Before we get started, remember you can reference the feature-length video of this build and compare what I'm saying. That's going to be a deeper dive here than it is there, but still different footage. There's a 4-minute time-lapse just for fun, and remember to check out the 8 parts in this series. So, let's get started. Well, we've been thinking about a shed for the better part of 8 years since we bought our house. And given that this was built in the summer of 2020, for future people watching this, in the time of the COVID-19 quarantine, all of our travels were canceled and plans had been rearranged, and we thought, we've got some money that can be spent in different spots, it's time to build that shed. So we started looking at the site where we wanted to build this, and for me it happened to be between a compost pile and a row of 10 arborvitae trees. This was ideal for us for several different reasons. It's in the middle of our backyard. It is on a level surface for the most part. Our backyard has a grade, and this is pretty much the most level part. And we wanted a shed that was going to be of a good size. Anything in our city ordinance that was above 100 square feet had to have a paved foundation, and I didn't want to do that, so we kept it under 100 square feet, and that meant a couple different permutations, and we settled on an 8-foot deep by 12-foot orientation because that nestles well between the tree and the compost pile that we had existing, and I can keep it 4 feet away from my property line, which is further than it needs to be for code, and it's not jutting out into the yard, all that jazz. These were the kind of things we had to consider before we got started. And then it came time to actually starting, and that was a thrill because sometimes you just need a clean slate before you can start on a project, And for me, that consisted of cutting down one of the arborvitae, ripping out an old Mughal pine that was just, there, and pulling out so many weeds and other roots and junk that was just sitting here, kind of obscured, It was one of those things that you kind of just walk past and keep it out of your mind. And anyways, it was time to get rid of it, and I had help. It was great. We had a nice bonfire that night, getting rid of the things that we had cut down, and it was very satisfying. Of course, then it rained. I needed to wait for the rain to go away and things to evaporate before I started digging, but eventually I did. And this shed is built upon 2 6x6 green-treated skids. Each skid in the end had to be the same height, and they had to be the same left to right, and they shouldn't be rocking, anything like that. So I dug 2 trenches that were about 13 feet long and a foot deep, and I filled those 4 or 5 inches with gravel until they were level. And I used that to zhuzh around the skids, the big 6x6 12-foot posts, and until they were exactly where I needed to be. And you can, of course, confirm that they are square by taking your tape measure and going corner to corner and seeing if that measurement is the same. That's how you know they're going to be nice and square. And it's important, as you're starting to build the shed, to have as much accuracy as you can in the beginning, so that accuracy carries through the entire project, or else you're going to be regretting it in different stages. Once the skids were done, and I felt like I had accomplished something already, just as we're beginning this entire project, it was time to move on to the floor joists. In this case, it was a series of rims and joists that were put together, 2 12-foot pieces on the outside with some about 8 foot on the middle, 16 inches on center, and all of these measurements I ended up getting from some plans that I downloaded from iCreatables.com. Not a sponsor of this video, but I had seen other projects that were put together by iCreatables plans, and I just loved it. So there's a link to that in the description if you're shopping for shed plans and ideas. A great place to get started. I used that for, I would say, 60% of this build. It was the skeleton that I went off of and based my ideas around. And it was nice. I didn't have to worry about making any of those calculations myself. So this was fun. This was the basis of essentially all of the skeleton work that I needed to do. Figuring out how to actually frame something we'd be doing again in the future with the walls and the rafters essentially. So this is just a great big rectangle. And once that was completed, we had to put on the floor. Now, I opted for green treated everything up, about a foot off the ground. The skids are green treated, the rims and joists are green treated, as is the plywood floor that I'm doing. I ended up going with 3/4 inch straight up plywood, not OSB. You can do a lot of different things. I just thought I'm doing this myself, so I'm saving money. And we had a little bit of extra funds, and I thought I should invest in a better quality floor that would last me just a long, long time. Prolong the life of this project was a big goal of mine. So the sheets go on in a really straightforward manner. You start, in my case, with one 8-foot section. You get that nice and square, you nail it on, you cut another sheet in half, you do that 4-foot section, and then you put the other 8-foot on in the other corner, and then the other 4-foot on in the other corner, so you're not having these seams that go the entire way through. You do that kind of overlapping pattern. Works really well. Just a couple things to keep in mind. You definitely have to lay down your contact adhesive. That will make sure your floor is less likely to creak in the future. It's an extra point of contact between the wood from the floor and the joists underneath it, which is terrific. And then you nail it down. Another thing to consider, when you are splitting a joist underneath, make sure as one sheet of plywood ends, the other sheet is starting on top of a joist, so you can nail it in both, on both sheets. Does that make sense? I'm sure you're seeing footage where that makes sense. It's important to make sure your math lines up with what you have here. Otherwise, you're going to create a section in the floor. When you step on it, it's going to bounce like this, and you're going to be really ticked. Fortunately, I didn't do that, but it's just something to keep in mind. Nailing it on, I made sure to do every 6 inches on the perimeter of each board, and then every 12 inches in between. That was what the instructions had suggested for me. I'm not going to be going through and talking about the type of nails that I'm driving here. Those are all outlined in the instructions, which actually you can download some of them yourself for free, the parts list at least, and get an idea off of that. And then voila, I had a floor, and it felt really satisfying. And this is the basis of the footprint of the shed. And from here, I was able to truly extrapolate what it was going to look like in the space. And even better, now I had a work surface to actually build the walls and frame the rafters and things, which would be really helpful as opposed to doing this in the grass in my yard. A couple closing thoughts. Things that I might have done if I could go back and do them differently. First off, I'm just doing standard plywood that butted up against itself like this. Remember to keep that 1/8 of an inch gap between pieces here. I don't know that I did purposefully, but it ended up being that way just because I was figuring things out and doing it myself, that there's some slight gaps, which is good because your wood is going to expand. Make sure you have that 1/8 of an inch gap in between. Better yet, if you have plywood that has, like a little bump at the end, like a tongue and groove kind of plywood interlocking, that is what I would have used, because those build in that gap space and they completely cover the surface. It wasn't available for me at the time. There were several instances of supply chain backlogs. Again, just pandemic frustrations, but if it was available to me, that's what I would have gone with, and that's what I would recommend. So yeah, now the floor is done, and I had alluded earlier that this is a great space for building your walls and for framing your rafters. So to that end, part 2 is showing you how I framed all the rafters, made some great little template here, kind of a jig that speeds up the whole process, makes it nice and even so you're not making mistakes and your pointed roof turns out wonky. Check that out, that's part number 2. Again, there's the feature length video and the time lapse. Subscribe if you like this, leave a comment below how you've done things with the floor or what you think I could have done differently that I didn't already talk about. Thanks a lot for watching. My name's Christopher. Have a wonderful day.